You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
I am a scientist. I am a scientist. I am a scientist. We gotta live on science alone.
Welcome to Unbiased Science, where we bring scientific method to the madness. We're your hosts, Dr. Jessica Steyer
and Dr. Andrea Love.
And this week, we're doing a little bit of a pulse check on respiratory illness season, because we're in it now, and discussing where we're at with COVID, flu, and RSV. So let's set the stage a little bit. So 4.25 million annual deaths. So 4.25 million people die every year, and at least 6% of the world's deaths and disabilities are due to acute respiratory infections. So as of 2019, 17.2 billion with a B upper respiratory infections accounted for almost 43% of all cause illnesses globally. Now, when we look at lower respiratory illnesses specifically, in 2019, there were almost 500 million incident cases and 2.4 million deaths due to lower respiratory illness. And the global age standardized incidence and death rates for lower respiratory illness were about 6,200 and 34 per 100,000 in 2019, which represents a 24% and 49% decrease, respectively, since 1990.
Now, that's really encouraging because it suggests that a lot of the measures that we've been taking to reduce disease burden, illness, and mortality for many of these are working, right? We have better therapeutic interventions, we have earlier diagnostics, we have antivirals for things like influenza. And the reason that we're talking, of course, COVID, flu, and RSV is because we now have vaccines for those three. When you're looking at acute respiratory infections and lower respiratory illness, the major players are influenza viruses, parainfluenza viruses, human metapneumoviruses, coronaviruses, which now include SARS-CoV-2, but there also are the human coronaviruses that cause like common colds. You have respiratory syncytial virus, and then the rhinoviruses, which are also viruses that cause the common cold. So, these are all different species and different families of viruses, but they're all able to infect humans, other mammals, and many of them can also infect other species such as birds and so on. So when we're talking specifically about COVID-19, the flu, and RSV, we're talking about three specific and different virus groups. So COVID-19 is caused by SARS-CoV-2, which is SARS coronavirus 2, and this is in the coronavirus family. Coronaviruses are positive sense single-strand RNA viruses, and they're enveloped. Many human viruses or many pathogenic viruses are enveloped, and that facilitates the ability of the virus to interact and infect with our cells. The influenza viruses are a very big family of viruses, broadly including influenzas A, B, C, D, and E. We typically talk mostly about influenza A and influenza B viruses. Those are the most common causes of illness in humans, but these are in the orthomyxovirus family. Now, these are also single-stranded RNA. They're what we call a negative sense RNA. And the unique thing about the influenza viruses is that they have a segmented genome. So what that means is that their RNA is not in a single piece like it is in the case of SARS-CoV-2 or other RNA viruses, but it's in smaller pieces. And that enables these influenza viruses to mutate very quickly because they can actually swap pieces of their genome. And this leads to their ability to mutate through two different processes. The typical antigenic drift that we hear a lot about, this is kind of your general mutation, but also antigenic shift, which leads to the evolution or the emergence of an entirely new influenza virus. And these can often lead to pandemic influenza. And then finally, the respiratory syncytial virus. This is in the paramyxovirus family. This is also a negative sense single-stranded RNA genome, but it's not segmented like the influenza. So again, doesn't mutate through that antigenic shift. Same is true for SARS-CoV-2. So again, these are all three viruses of public health concern. And as of this year, we now have vaccines for all three of them.
And obviously, we're going to get into that. Just a couple of high-level things to note here. So one, we get questions, or I guess we get comments sometimes that, can you test positive for COVID if you actually have the flu, and, vice versa? And the answer is no, unless you're also co-infected, right?
Correct.
But no, these tests look specifically, what is it that they're testing for, Andrea? Is it
So it really depends on the type of test, but if we're talking about an antigen test, like a rapid test, that's going to be looking for a specific protein that's unique to the given virus. So in the case of SARS-CoV-2, that's going to be either a structural protein or potentially the spike protein. For something like influenza, this is going to be a protein like hemagglutinin or neuraminidase, that are proteins that the influenza virus produces. So these proteins are very distinct and unique. And so you're not going to falsely test positive for one when you're infected with the other.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to just read up. We wanted to pull the latest stats on COVID. So we're recording this on October 6th. I think it's going to air a couple of weeks from now. But all right, so let's pull some stats. So right now, the test positivity is at around 11.6%. That's a slight decrease, but if you look over the past month or so, it's been trending upwards. And remember, we're likely underestimating because, if people are testing at home, most people are not reporting those results. So yes, that's likely an underestimate. Emergency department visits, we're seeing about 1.8% diagnosed as COVID-19. So in terms of the people who are showing up to the ED, about 2% are diagnosed with COVID. We're seeing about 20,000 hospital admissions per week. And right now, 2.7% of all deaths in the US are due to COVID-19. If you look at trends longitudinally, you'll see that we're on an uptick right now. We're in a surge. And that's why it's kind of a good thing that we recently, and obviously this is the big update, we have some updates in the COVID vaccine world.
In the US, of course, we're US based, so most of the data we present are going to be based on CDC and FDA. But on September 11th, the FDA approved the updated COVID-19 vaccine formulations from both Moderna and Pfizer. And these are the mRNA-based vaccines for COVID-19. Both of these vaccines target the XBB.1.5 Omicron subvariant. And the following day, on September 12th, the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices voted 13-1 in support of recommending the updated COVID-19 vaccine for everyone 6 months and older. So what that means is that everyone is eligible, 6 months and older, including those who are pregnant, including those who have gotten vaccines previously, can go get the updated vaccine. And we are now calling this the 2023-2024 vaccine, just for continuity's sake and to streamline and eliminate confusion. So if you go to make your vaccine appointment at this point, you're going to get the updated vaccine. Once this was approved by FDA, this removed the previous approval for the previous formulation, which was the bivalent formulation. That was a 1-1 mixture of the parental strain of SARS-CoV-2 and the Omicron BA4, BA5 variant. Now, the other important news that just happened earlier this week, it was on October 3rd, is that FDA authorized the use of the Novavax protein subunit based COVID vaccine. And this is also an updated formulation that targets XBB.1.5. So this one is going to be authorized for emergency use authorization as opposed to FDA approval. That doesn't mean that it's less safe. It just is how the data were submitted and reviewed by FDA. This one is only going to be available for individuals 12 and up. Now, because this review and recommendation from FDA came after the CDC's ACIP meeting on September 12th, CDC actually stated on September 12th that if FDA deems Novavax data to be comparable to the existing mRNA vaccines, they don't need to meet again. So this vaccine will be available probably to everyone by the time this airs. So this vaccine, one of the advantages is because it's a protein-based, it's a little bit more shelf-stable, so it can be safely stored in a refrigerator. So this can be really advantageous for people in areas where it might be a little bit more challenging to store and access the mRNA-based vaccines.
So I was just going to say, so obviously the number one question that we're getting is, which vaccine should I get? You know, is one better than the other? Andrea, how would you answer that question?
Get the vaccine you're willing to get. So, you know, there's obviously still quite a bit of misinformation about mRNA vaccines, and that has led to certain populations being hesitant to get those vaccines. I'll reiterate that mRNA vaccine technology and research has been going on for decades. We just saw the Nobel Prize be awarded to Drs. Weissman and Carrico for their work specifically, which started in the 1990s on mRNA vaccine technology. If your concerns are not assuaged, the Novavax vaccine uses a protein-based technology, which is considered by some to be a little bit older, although, the way that it's formulated is certainly not identical to other protein-based vaccines. Efficacy is probably going to be comparable. I'm not quite sure why people are saying that Novavax is more robust and longer lasting, because there aren't any data to suggest that. If you look at the initial clinical trial data when parental SARS-CoV-2 was circulating, efficacy of Pfizer against symptomatic illness was 96%, Moderna was 98%, and Novavax trial was 90%. So similar across the board. That was before a lot of mutations occurred. Novavax has not been as widely used. So if you look at real world evidence, you can't really compare the data because there have been billions of mRNA vaccines administered and not nearly as many Novavax vaccines administered. So, all things considered, if that's the one you're more willing to get that one. If it's not available in your area, you should be perfectly happy to get the mRNA vaccines.
And we should note, so Andrea and I did not wait for Novavax, and nor are we waiting for the holidays, which unfortunately some people are waiting for that. But, as we said, there's a surge right now. And so we wanted to go ahead and get our vaccines. We both got the mRNA vaccine. Did we both? I got Moderna. Did you?
I got Moderna also, yeah.
And that's because that was what was available at my local pharmacy. If they had Pfizer, I would have gotten Pfizer. If Novavax was the option, I would have gotten Novavax. There really was no preference. It was about which vaccine we could get the soonest and which was most accessible to us.
We both also happened to get our flu vaccines at the same exact time, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I want to talk quickly about the kids vaccine conversation. So as we mentioned, Novavax is only available for individuals 12 and older, but everyone 6 months and older can go get an mRNA updated vaccine. And there's a lot of questions about the pediatric vaccines because the dosing schedules and the dosage themselves were a little bit different depending on Pfizer versus Moderna. And so and we'll have some posts on this as well, but anyone can get that updated vaccine. But the recommendation is if your children are younger than 5 years old and they didn't finish the original recommended dosing schedule, you want to complete that with the updated formulation. So essentially, if you got the Moderna series, that would have been 2 doses for the primary series. If you got those already, you can go get one dose of the updated vaccine. If you only got one dose of the Moderna series so far, you'll get 2 doses of the updated vaccine, one to complete the series and then a subsequent one at least 2 months after that final one. For the Pfizer one, it was 3 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. So again, if your kid only got one of those so far, they're eligible for 2 more to complete the series. And then you can also opt to get an additional one, but you probably won't need to at this point. Or if you got 2 doses, then you would want to complete that with at least 1 dose of the updated formulation. So basically any of the gaps in the primary vaccine series, you'll just get with the new formulation because that's the one that's available. There were also questions about mixing and matching. Now, because the dosing was a little bit different between Moderna and Pfizer, generally kids 5 and under should try to stick with the same brand for the primary series. But actually yesterday, October 5th, there was a roundtable or a fireside chat with CDC's Mandy Cohen, who's the new director. And she said, ultimately, if you don't have access to one or the other and it's not possible to stick with the same brand, you can mix and match for kids younger than 5.
All right, few things I wanted to go through. First of all, if you're not aware, we created a little vaccine calculator that makes it super simple. You could just, put in information on what you've received, if you have received any vaccines thus far, and it lets you know what you're eligible for. And at the time of this recording release, that will be updated based on the new recommendations, and we'll link to that in the show notes, and it'll be in our bio on Instagram. A couple of other things, you should wait, at least, just commonly asked questions. You should wait 2 months is the minimum after, if you received a previous COVID vaccine, you should wait at least 2 months before receiving this updated vaccine. You should also wait at least 3 months if you were previously sick with COVID. And Andrea, I think, did you want to just comment on that? It's at least 3 months.
Yeah. But I mean, there's some people on social media who are telling people to postpone it longer. I would say the range is probably 3 to 6 months. And the reason for that is if you're higher risk, you might not develop as robust an antibody or a T cell response after infection. You can opt to get it a little bit sooner in that window. People who are lower risk or, maybe had generated a more robust immune response can move to the end of the window. I know some people are saying 8 months. I haven't seen any convincing data that that's, based on data. And especially now that we're in a surge and holidays are approaching and people are going to be engaging in high risk behavior, I would say, and I think Peter Hote has even agreed with us, the range would be kind of 3 to 6 months after recent illness. And of course, weigh in your own personal risk factors. If you're going to be traveling, if you're going to be going to a gathering, you can opt to get vaccinated earlier in that range. If you're not going to be, interacting with people or engaging in potentially high-risk behaviors or risk of exposure, then you can maybe move a little bit later in that range.
So I have just 1 or 2 more things to note about the COVID vaccine, but I just want to flag, Andrea, you just made a really interesting, an important point about how people should assess sort of their risk. Because if you're going, let's say you're going to a wedding with 500 people, that's going to be a factor as you consider timing of things. But also don't forget that we have other tools in our tool belt when it comes to mitigation. So we always say, it's sort of like the Swiss cheese model of health risk, right? Vaccines are one layer, but then if you're in a high risk setting, like for example, if you're going to the doctor's office, you can wear a mask. That provides protection. Be outdoors whenever possible, open windows, improve ventilation whenever possible. There are other things that we can do that will help overall bring our risk down.
Yeah. And we can also, if you're having a gathering, you can have people take rapid tests before gathering, which was,
right,
a very widespread recommendation last year and the year before. So, there's a lot of things that you can do to reduce overall risk in addition to vaccines.
And I'm so glad you said that, because we should remind people that they can go ahead and order those free COVID tests. The federal government has reopened that, mail program. So if you go to covidtest.gov, you can get, I think it's 4 no-cost tests mailed to you through the U.S. Postal Service.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Just really quickly, a couple of other quick things. Actually, you know what? Can I just say one more thing about masking? Because Andrea,
Yeah.
you and I get this question all the time. And just to be transparent, we are not masking all the time. This is our, we made this decision based on our risk factors. And, we basically, we're so confident in the vaccines that we know that our risk of hospitalization, severe illness, or death is extremely low. If cases continue to spike, we might revisit that. Maybe we do mask in more situations. But right now, we're masking in high risk situations. I will always mask, honestly, for as long as I live, in doctors' offices to protect against transmission of a variety of infectious illnesses that could be transmitted via droplet transmission. It's sort of an easy no-brainer. I also masked on some recent flights when I was on the plane. So, you have to sort of use your best judgment. All right, other couple of quick things I wanted to note before we move on to our next respiratory illness is this updated vaccine was not just tested in 10 mice. That is absurd. So, we've talked so much, it's almost like funny to talk about it now, that these vaccines were so rigorously tested. We now have billions of data points. We have, decades of data on the mRNA technology. We now have 2+ years of data on these vaccines specifically. So what happens when the formulations are updated, the technology is not changing. It's just, and I'm going to butcher this, Andrea, you'll need to come in with the actual immunology terms, but they're being updated based on the circulating strains. So the technology is not changing. You'll have to tell me what is changing, Andrea, because the way that I'll say it is not correct. But because of that, there are no safety implications. We're not changing anything except the strain that's being targeted. So no, we did not just test this in 10 mice. And actually, Moderna did do clinical trials in humans on this updated vaccine. We just want to note that. And so just like how the flu vaccine is updated every year, we don't need to go through all of the clinical trials over again because, again, technology is not changing. It's just the strain that's targeted that's changing.
So there is a very well-established regulatory process for this. It's called a bridging study. And so if people are making claims, they don't have a sense of how medications are reviewed and regulated by the FDA. Bridging studies are very common. Anytime a formulation is adjusted or altered, and essentially what you're doing is you're verifying that there's no change from the tweak you've made to the composition compared to the earlier FDA-approved product. I'm not going to go into all of the regulatory steps involved, but this is something that's well established. So if you come up against somebody, just say, I guess you don't know what a bridging study is. So basically all they did was adjust for some of the structural changes in the spike protein. So when you're talking about mRNA, that means you're changing some of the codons, which are the 3-letter sequences of nucleotides that are in the RNA sequence that lead to different amino acids, which ultimately lead to your protein. So you changed a couple of the order of some of these chemical subunits so that the mRNA is more representative of what the new spike protein structure will look like. And that's all that was changed. So,
and maybe this is a good segue into our next respiratory illness, influenza, or with the virus. Sorry, you're very big on the language there. I don't want to butcher that.
Very important.
So why do we, if the vaccines work so well, why do we have to get a new one every year? And we could ask this of COVID and maybe of flu, and perhaps can segue. Andrea?
Yes. So, I mean, there's a few reasons. We'll simplify this, but the first reason is the fact that influenza viruses in particular, as I mentioned, they have 2 different ways of mutating, and that means that they can change very quickly. So the strains that are circulating most heavily a previous year may not even exist the following year. So as a result, we have to adjust the vaccine so that when our immune system encounters the newer viruses, we're better equipped to combat illness. And the same is true for SARS-CoV-2, although actually to a lesser degree. Now, It's circulating quite rampantly for the last 3 years. So we've seen higher rates of mutation than you would expect when it's more stable. But that's the first reason. So as mutations occur, our immune response is not as perfectly matched as it was initially. So vaccinating with a newer formulation will augment our immune response. Related to that is that all of these respiratory viruses initiate or infect through our respiratory tract. So there's an arm of our immune response called the mucosal immune response that's mediated primarily by kind of a different subset of antibodies. These are called IgA, mucosal antibodies, and also some different types of immune cells that we're just not as effective at harnessing when we create vaccines. And what that means, and that's true for a lot of respiratory viruses, is that we just simply don't develop really long-term immunity to them because of the nature of the different types of immune responses that are involved in infection and illness and even with vaccination. And of course, that's going to lead to just a decline in general immune response over time. And so that's going to allow us to augment that in the absence of really being able to harness that mucosal immunity. The goal for all of these respiratory viruses is to have something universal, but there are potentially hundreds of different influenza viruses out there, all with slight differences, and there are different variants of SARS-CoV-2. And so there isn't a universal vaccine right now. And so, in the absence of that, we have to tweak the current vaccine to be more representative of what we're exposed to.
All right. So let's shift gears and talk specifically about flu. So the way that we get our information, we base a lot of our recommendations on the Southern Hemisphere, right? Because they have their flu season earlier than we do. And this year's Southern Hemisphere flu season had an earlier peak during April to May compared to typical peaks, which usually occur in June to July. And of the specimens that tested positive for influenza, approximately 90% were flu type A and 10% were influenza type B. Now, it doesn't mean that, necessarily what happens in the Southern Hemisphere is going to happen here in the Northern Hemisphere, but that's what we use to sort of predict what the season will look like and how best to formulate our vaccines.
And the flu vaccines, the current flu vaccines, and this has been the case for quite some time, they're always what we call a quadrivalent, meaning they have, or quadrivalent, depending on who you're talking to, they cover 4 different influenzas. So typically it's always 2 influenza A's and 2 influenza B's. So this year, the 2 influenza A's are an H1N1 and an H3N2. These relate to the different types of the proteins, the hemagglutinin and the neuraminidase. And then the 2B, one is what we call a Victoria lineage and one is a Yamagata lineage. So 4 different influenzas, and that's based on surveillance of the strains and the predominance of influenzas in the other half of the world.
Mm-hmm. So last flu season also started a little bit early, with activity increasing in the U.S. at the beginning of October of 2022, and then it peaked in early December. It caused an estimated 27 million illnesses and 300,000 hospitalizations. So basically what the recommendation is now is that you should get your vaccine before the end of October. Both Andrea and I, we both received our flu vaccines already. We got them at the same time as our COVID vaccines. We get this question.
Which you can do.
Yes, you can do that. And if you didn't, it's okay to get it at any time. There's no specific time period that you need to wait. It's fine to get them at the same time. And Andrea, you actually got a third vaccine at the same time.
I got a hepatitis B vaccine. So I tripled up this year. It was great. I feel very protected. And there's a lot of myths about flu vaccines. The flu vaccine is not an mRNA and it's not a protein vaccine either. It is an inactivated virus vaccine. It doesn't contain live flu virus. It doesn't contain heavy metals. It doesn't contain thimerosal. It doesn't contain a lot of things that circulate about it. It is completely safe to get. Anyone 6 months and older should get the flu vaccine. It is safe during pregnancy. You will not get the flu if you get the flu shot. I mean, you don't get the flu from the flu shot. It doesn't fully eliminate your risk of getting the flu, but it severely reduces the likelihood of getting the flu, as well as reduce illness severity, risk of hospitalization, and risk of death. There is a nasal spray vaccine for the flu for people who really don't like needles. This is for people aged 2 through 49 and not during pregnancy. This is an attenuated viral vaccine. And then for individuals who are older, there's actually a larger antigen dose vaccine, which means it has more of the antigen to protect you against flu, because as you age, you undergo a process called immunosenescence, which means that your immune system is not quite as reactive. And you're also at higher risk for complications due to the flu, most commonly secondary infections like bacterial pneumonia. And so the vaccine for older individuals has more of the active ingredient so that you can augment your immune response and protect you better against the flu.
And the good news is that I'm just lumping myself now in with all the scientists working on this, are working towards creating a combined flu and COVID vaccine. Was it Moderna who just released some preliminary data?
Phase 1, phase 2 trials on a combined vaccine. Yeah. And this has been, obviously a topic of interest for a long time. We have some other combined vaccines, of course. There is actually a hepatitis A, hepatitis B combined. We obviously have the MMR, which is measles, mumps, rubella. We have the Tdap, which is tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. So, combined vaccines are great because it allows you to protect against multiple pathogens at the same time.
Right. So if you're listening to this right now and you haven't already received your flu vaccine, go ahead, get that out of the way, CVS, wherever you get your vaccines. And also, if you haven't received the updated COVID vaccine and you're eligible for it, you should just go ahead and knock them out at the same time. That's what we did. Easy peasy.
And just for your age groups who are wondering about who should get the high dose flu, it's anyone 65 and older. Now, ideally, your pharmacist or your GP should be telling you about this. But just in case you're not aware, if you're 65 and older, you haven't gotten your flu shot, you want to get the high dose. This is basically, it's a 4 times dose, and it's going to give you much better protection.
Okay, okie dokie. And did we mention, you probably did, that if you have an egg allergy, you can still receive a flu vaccine.
Absolutely.
That's a common misconception.
Yep.
We hear that all the time.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And by the way, there's so much more that we can say about this. We are doing lots of posts constantly on COVID and flu and on this topic of RSV, which we'll talk about. Yep.
We have several podcast episodes about the flu as well, so you can go listen to those.
Right. Long COVID, we've said we haven't talked a lot about long COVID yet, because we are still learning about it, right? There's a lot we don't know. Right now, it encompasses, I forget how many symptoms, or it's at least 24 symptoms right now. So it's very non-specific. So it's sort of difficult to tease out what is actually long COVID versus other chronic conditions. But what we do know is that the vaccines do protect against long COVID. It reduces the likelihood of long COVID by, I believe it's like 30 to 40% based on the latest data, and also reduces the severity of long COVID if you get long COVID. So yes, even if you are young and healthy and you're not super concerned about being sick with COVID, you should know that even very mild or asymptomatic cases of COVID have led to long COVID, and the vaccines are a great tool to protect against that. All right, so let's move on to RSV. I'm just going to give some stats, and then Andrea, maybe you can get into what it actually is. But RSV is the leading cause of hospitalization among infants in the US. So between 60,000 to 80,000 kids under the age of 5 are hospitalized for RSV every year. And the majority of these children are actually infants. And then looking at the older population, so among adults over the age of 65, we see about 60,000 to 160,000 hospitalizations and between 6,000 and 10,000 deaths, again, among adults over the age of 65. And Andrea, I think you just shared something. I haven't had a chance to read the data, but we're seeing RSV leading to similar rates of hospitalization and death, I believe, among
Yeah,
adults over the age of 65, right?
Compared to COVID as well.
Right, compared to COVID,
Yes,
yep.
yeah. So it's certainly a substantial public health concern. And up to this point, we really haven't had a ton of options.
All right, what is RSV, Andrea?
So RSV is respiratory syncytial virus. As I mentioned, it is in the family paramyxovirus. It is an RNA-based virus that is enveloped. It doesn't have a segmented genome, which means it doesn't mutate, obviously, as quickly as something like the influenza viruses, but it's very, very contagious. It obviously infects your respiratory tract. It can lead to systemic illness, but most commonly what we call lower respiratory tract disease, which can lead to complications such as pneumonia, which is essentially fluid buildup and compromised lung function, bronchiolitis, which is inflammation of the bronchioles, which are the little pockets that help you breathe and transport oxygen. And so, it's obviously something that is a cause for concern, a severe reason for morbidity and mortality in individuals. And as Jess mentioned, the highest risk individuals are really, really young infants and older adults.
And the good news is that there was recently a flurry of approvals for amazing preventives, some vaccines and some monoclonal antibody treatments, which are being used as preventatives for our highest risk populations. So with the 60 plus population, the first vaccine for adults 60 years and older, Arexvy, was approved on May 3rd, 2023. So again, older adults, in particular those with underlying health conditions such as heart or lung disease or weakened immune systems, are at high risk for severe disease caused by RSV. Andrew, did you want to present any? I know we have some data, but we probably are also doing posts on this.
Yeah, I can summarize it really quickly. So there's also a second vaccine, Abrysvo, and that was also approved in May for individuals 60 and older. So there's two vaccines available for individuals 60 and older. These are both protein-based vaccines. So they use a particular protein that's found in the RSV virus, and they are single-dose vaccines. And they're, again, both administered intramuscularly, and they both have really good efficacy, very similar. So if you're looking at Arexvy, when you're looking at efficacy during the first season of RSV after vaccination, the efficacy of preventing confirmed, so lab confirmed lower respiratory tract disease due to RSV is about 83%. That's fantastic. If you look at Abrysvo, you're looking at about 89% prevention for symptomatic laboratory confirmed lower respiratory tract disease. And even through the second RSV season, you still have pretty good protection. I think with Arexvy, it went down to about 56% and then about 78% for Abrysvo. And so what this means is that not only are you preventing infection, but you're preventing illness that's associated with RSV. On top of that, both of these vaccines were really effective in preventing medically attended associated lower respiratory tract disease. So these would be ones that you might be getting hospitalized, you might need respiratory care. I think for Arexvy, it was 77.5% efficacy and 81% for Abrysvo. So really, really effective at both preventing illness and in illness that needs medical attention, which is really encouraging because, as Jess noted, we're seeing, upwards of 150,000 hospitalizations and 10,000 deaths every single year in this particular demographic.
Mm-hmm. And those efficacy numbers are really impressive. I mean, these are amazing vaccines. And just one quick note, I'm so sorry, I keep moving backwards, but one of the reasons we hear a lot of people don't get the flu vaccine is because, it's not effective, it's not effective. That's not true. Typically, the rates range from about 30 to 60% effective at preventing severe illness, hospitalization, and death. Last year, the vaccine was in that upper end. I forget. I don't know exactly what the efficacy was, but I think it was around 60%. And these numbers are amazing. And also talking about COVID, the COVID vaccine, we need to remind people over and over again that the primary purpose of the vaccine is not to prevent transmission. That was never the primary purpose of the vaccine. The purpose of the vaccine is to prevent, again, severe illness, hospitalization, and death. And the vaccines are extremely good at that. All right, Andrea, what other preventatives do we have for RSV?
So that same vaccine, Brivzo, was also approved for use in pregnancy to prevent lower respiratory tract disease, essentially for infants. So this is basically going to be used during gestation, so 32 to 36 weeks of pregnancy. Again, single dose vaccine, same dosage that would be for the individual 60 and older. And so basically what happens is during pregnancy, you're going to mount that immune response, you're going to develop that immune protection, and that passive antibody transfer is going to go across the placenta into the developing fetus. So when the baby is born, they're going to have protection when they're at highest risk and too young to really have a fully formed immune system of their own. So that's another one. And then there's also this new preventative, which is a monoclonal antibody. So a monoclonal antibody is basically a protein that we've generated that utilizes the same principle that our B cells do in our body. So we essentially engineer B cells. Well, they're kind of hybrid B cells in the lab, and they spit out lots of these antibodies, and then we can purify those and use those as a therapeutic. And this one is called Beyfortus. This was approved in May of 2023. This is for children under 2 years of age, and this would be essentially administered to kids, essentially at birth or in the window 24 months or younger. And this would basically be administered in order to prevent severe lower respiratory tract disease due to respiratory syncytial virus. So this is, again, an intramuscular injection, single dose, and this would offer protection to those young kids during that RSV season.
So if, let's say, you receive the vaccine during pregnancy, you're not then also supposed to get your infant the monoclonal and Beyfortus, right? I'm mixing up the names.
That's exactly right.
So it's sort of like an either or situation.
Yes, exactly. So typically you would get Beyfortus if the mother did not get the RSV vaccine during the pregnancy. You don't know whether or not she was vaccinated, or the interval between the vaccine during pregnancy and birth was less than 14 days. So say you were pregnant, you got vaccinated at 36 weeks, but then you went into early labor and you didn't have that 2-week window, then you would get the Beyfortus for your baby. I do want to note there is another monoclonal antibody that's been on the market for over 20 years. It's called Synagis. This is a monoclonal antibody for infants for very specific use cases. And typically these are going to be premature infants who are 6 months of age or younger before RSV season starts, those that have bronchopulmonary dysplasia, so this is like compromised lung function, or if they have congenital heart disease. So again, this one has been on the market for a while, but the availability of Beyfortus now is for all infants, which is fantastic.
I think we need to just take a moment before we wrap here to acknowledge how amazing it is that we live during a time when we have these amazing preventatives available to us. And it's so frustrating when we hear people downplay all three of these illnesses, which have killed millions of people. And they more than that, no, not more than that, but in addition to that, people are hospitalized, and you have to think you're home from work or from school, and you don't want to get very sick if we could prevent it. And we have these safe and highly effective preventative tools. I don't know. I find it difficult to wrap my mind around the fact that people take these things for granted.
Yeah, no, it's and we hear a lot, people don't also think about this economic impact, not just on you personally, but our society, missed work, cost of healthcare. I mean, we obviously don't live in a society that has universal healthcare, and that can be very expensive. And, it's billions of dollars every year that is a result of these sorts of respiratory infections. One last thing I want to note about Beyfortus versus Brivzo. So there's this confusion, right? Like, so should I get the RSV vaccine if I'm pregnant, or should I wait till my baby's born and give them the monoclonal antibody? So there's a couple of things you kind of want to ask yourself, and of course consult with your clinical team. But if you get the vaccine during pregnancy, your baby's going to essentially be born with passive antibodies, with protection at birth. It also means that the infant's not going to need another another injection immediately after birth. So, that's kind of nominal, but it's something to think about. But there is some evidence that Beyfortus, which is the monoclonal antibody, may provide a little bit longer protection for your baby. So that's, again, if they're high risk or if you think they might be high risk, that might be something to factor in. But then the other thing is that it may be harder to access Beyfortus, the monoclonal antibody, versus the vaccine, especially this season. So if you're later in your pregnancy, those are all factors that you want to consider.
All right, I think we covered a lot of ground here. Takeaway is go get your vaccines.
Yes. And also super excited that we have all of these options for this upcoming RSV season. I can't wait to see some of the real world evidence that comes out of this. So thanks for tuning in today. We hope you learned a thing or two. If you want to support our efforts and grow the impact of Unbiased Science, we welcome your contributions. We have a donation page on our website, a Venmo account, and a coffee page. We also have some fun, snarky merch. If you haven't seen any of it yet, you can get your own You're a Sack of Chemicals shirt. Your anecdote is not evidence. Science is sexy. Got aspartame. All the options on our website, www.unbiasedscipod.com. And make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our handle is @UnbiasedSciPod, and all of our social channels @UnbiasedSciPod. Catch you next time on the pod, your trusted source for no nonsense, just science.
Yeah, I am a scientist.